Hi, I'm Baldur and this is the Conducting Coaching Podcast, where we talk about conducting from the inside. Hello everybody. Now the sound you're hearing at the beginning of the Conducting Coaching Podcast obviously is a rehearsal. You know, the beginning of a rehearsal, people are tuning. And that is going to be the subject of today. We'll talk about rehearsing. Now, some time ago, I got a really interesting message from Maestro Anderson de Oliveira from Brazil, and he asked me about various things, but one of them was about rehearsing, rehearsal strategies and how to make rehearsal plans and so on. So I gave this some thought, and obviously rehearsing is a too big subject to fit it into one podcast. We have to go bit by bit because it's like non-verbal communication, verbal communication, what's happening between you and the musicians, what's happening inside you, how you transmit sounds and so on. There are lots of things, the difficult situations to deal with, how to get from A to B and so on. Endlessly many things to discuss, but we have to start somewhere. And that somewhere is going to be your first rehearsal with a new orchestra, with an orchestra you've never met before or a group you've never met before. We've all been there. That happens at some stage to everybody, or it will happen, or it's happening at the moment. So how do we deal with that? Because it can be quite a daunting situation. It can make you nervous, or it can leave you with the feeling after the first rehearsal that you really didn't achieve what you wanted to achieve. So how can we prepare for that? Now let's just imagine this. You walk into the rehearsal hall and then you'll hear this sound. And then you walk up to the podium, you shake the concertmaster's hand, you meet everybody, you get introduced or you introduce yourselves. The orchestra will tune, you arrange your scores and so on, and then you start working. And first of all, you have no idea what you're getting into because you have no idea. Maybe the orchestra just came out of a holiday, or they had a really difficult week before with a really difficult program. They had difficult situations, maybe with the administration or with a conductor, or they're just in a very good moment. You never know what's going on. What can you do? The first thing I would say is you have to gather as much information as you can. Ideally, you should go to a rehearsal before, meet the orchestra and see how they work, what their working dynamics are, how they talk to each other, how they talk to a conductor, how a conductor talks to them, what sort of things work with them and what their ways of relating to each other and to talking in a rehearsal are. Because this will help you then to tune into that frequency exactly when you start rehearsing, and it will feel like the train between you and the orchestra is already running. Then I would always recommend looking at parts, because in the parts you don't just see additions or bowings or so, but you see what people thought when they worked on a piece before. Especially important if it's works that the orchestra knows quite well, because there will be a performance history, and out of the parts you can somehow see what happened before. And that's of the sort of version they will play in the first rehearsal with you. Obviously, you can't always see a rehearsal of an orchestra before, but what you can do is you can speak to conductors who worked with them. This is especially useful because they will give you a conductor's perspective. They will say, look, they were much slower or much faster than what I thought. This worked well. This was more difficult and so on. Fundamentally, they see things from the same perspective as you are. But you can also talk to musicians in the orchestra if you know any, or even to people in the administration. Every bit of information will help you to get a clearer picture about the idiosyncrasies of an orchestra, to make that blind date between them and you a little bit less blind, and just make that start a bit smoother and to connect to them a bit quicker. Now, the second thing is you have to have a plan. And with a plan, I don't mean a rehearsal schedule. A rehearsal schedule is the big framework for the rehearsals, but a plan has to be more detailed. It has to contain what you want to achieve in a certain rehearsal. You can break this down into time, segments, and so on, But especially if you're at the beginning of your career, I totally recommend that you have a little roadmap to help you. This is for several reasons. First of all, if you get sidetracked with something that is unexpected, like let's say you rehearse something for a longer time than you thought, or something happens that you didn't quite foresee, you have always this roadmap to fall back onto. So by the end of the rehearsal, you won't be in the situation that you say like, I didn't do anything of what I wanted to do, or I just got stuck in the first 50 bars and never got any further. The roadmap is there for you to help to get back on track. I would also specify some places where you can go to whatever happens. So sometimes you might lose your train of thought because of things not being quite in the way you thought, or maybe you're not quite in the working rhythm of the orchestra and so on, and you just need quickly a place to go to and rehearse something meaningful. So it's good to fix these places when you can think cold, and just identify those as a sort of point of orientation. And now a little roadmap of a rehearsal might look like this. Like say you do a Beethoven symphony or so. So you play the whole piece through at the beginning of a rehearsal. And then for the rest of the first rehearsal, you might work on the most difficult movement, or, at one of the tutti movements that just needs the most work. And I think here the playing aspect at the beginning is very important. I would always start the first rehearsal with a lot of playing. Ideally, play a whole piece, because that's the way you make contact to an orchestra, and the way they make contact to you. Musicians are conditioned to pay attention when they play, not when you talk to them. So use that moment. Make sure you can look up from the score, you can see them breathe and interact, and you can start connecting to their way of playing. Now it's important not just to fix how far you have to get in a piece in the first rehearsal, like what you have to rehearse, but also to fix some fundamental signposts, some basic concepts of how you see a piece, because ideally you want everybody to walk out of the first rehearsal and to know exactly what they're aiming for. So that means that you have to find the right spots to rehearse the things you're after. And there usually it's no use to say too much. It's much better to rehearse something and then let the players hear the effect of the rehearsing. So how did the sound change? In which direction did you take it? And this gives them an idea what your basic concept is, or what is going on, what sound you have in your mind. And then they will apply this to other places in the piece as well. Now the next thing you can do in order to prepare is visualization. Visualization is really a super powerful tool that comes from high performance sports. Let's say people go to Olympics and have just one jump or one throw to show what they trained for over years. I think this is really useful for conductors too. It's really a kind of mental training. What you do is you go through a situation in your mind over and over again in as much detail as you can, and fundamentally you replace negative with positive images, so that when you're in the moment and you get nervous or you get sidetracked or you're just not in control, your mind is prepared to fall back of what it has been conditioned for. So that would mean that you start in the dressing room and you go through all the motions of entering the hall, what we just described, etc. And then you see yourself working, answering questions, conducting, working on the music. You imagine yourself in a kind of flow state. And as soon as you feel there's some clouds coming in, that you get nervous or you lose track of something, replace that thought with something that is positive, in control, and you're breathing and you're communicating. You're just in charge and in tune with the situation. Now, once you're a bit more experienced, you probably won't need so much preparation anymore for a first rehearsal, because you just know the situation and you know yourselves. you know how to handle yourselves. That even though you're nervous, you can still hear well, and you can say the right things, and you can stay on track. Your timing will get better, and so on. But I think it's very useful especially for things like auditions or competitions where you have a really short time. Because I see a lot of people who come on, and when their time is over, they just start to work in a meaningful way, or they just start to be really engaged, and that means you weren't mentally quite prepared. Getting as much information as you can, having a roadmap and practicing visualization is not going to work just with professionals. It's going to work with kids, with amateurs, with an orchestra, with a chorus, with any type of group you work with. It's going to make the first rehearsal more effective and also more satisfying for everybody. Try it out. Send me your thoughts, your comments. I'm curious to hear. Thanks for listening. To send us your comments or suggestions, please write us a message on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date with all the conducting coaching news and events.